But the detective, who had already retrieved the intruder's wallet and knew exactly who he was, avoided his question. He asked Mark to focus on telling them what happened. After Mark asked Cox who it was, and of times without receiving an answer, he finally asked Cox if the intruder's name was Roger. Cox felt that he finally had to answer, and told him yes, that his name was Roger Harrington. Mark responded, "Oh my God, this is the guy that's been harassing us all week." He explained that Roger was a shuttle driver that engaged in a frightening conversation with Donna less than a week before that. He told them he had called Roger that very morning, telling him to stop harassing his wife, and that he had filed a police report against him. What Detective Cox was not sharing with Mark was that he was already very familiar with Roger Harrington. Cox happened to own a trailer park in town, and Roger and his wife had rented a trailer from him. There, Harrington had been involved in domestic disputes where Cox himself had to get involved. So he considered 27-year-old Roger to be quick to anger, which fit with what he was seeing. While being questioned, Mark asked detectives if he could have a Diet Coke. So Detective Doug Williamson, the other lead detective on the case along with Cox, went to the refrigerator to get him the drink. That's when he noticed a note on the refrigerator. It was the multi-page note that Donna had written detailing her account with the shuttle driver. It fit perfectly with what Mark had described. Outside the home, Harrington's car was parked on the wrong side of the street, facing oncoming traffic. In it, they found a note that had Mark's name and address, along with a time, for .30. Also in his car, they found a knife and a tire iron with black electrical tape around the handle. Inside the house, they found a yellow coffee mug and cigarettes on the kitchen table, both belonging to Harrington. They also found a hammer covered in blood. The detectives consoled Mark, assuring him that he had done everything he could to try to save his wife, but that both Donna and Harrington had not survived their injuries. Mark was inconsolable and called his rabbi to come help comfort him through the ordeal. Mark was also worried that he'd be arrested for shooting the attacker, but there was no cause for concern. He and his wife were considered the victims of this heinous attack. Far from a criminal, Mark was hailed a hero for shooting his wife's attacker. Officially, Donna's death was listed as a murder by Harrington, and Harrington's death was listed as justified homicide due to self-defense. The case was closed within 48 hours. After the murder, all hands were on deck from Donna's family to help ease the pain and transition for Mark and baby Bailey. Donna's mother and sister, while still grieving for their own tremendous loss, took turns traveling to Springfield to help Mark care for the baby. During the visits, they noticed that Mark was behaving strangely, not at all as they expected. He was drinking excessively and would watch movies that had incredibly violent face-to-face shooting scenes you would think he would avoid after having just encountered one himself. But they didn't want to judge Mark and allowed him to grieve in whatever way helped him. As far as they were concerned, Mark loved Donna unconditionally and fully, so they loved him and supported him. He was every bit as much of the family as Donna was. After about 4 months of Donna's mother and sister traveling to help Mark, they got to the point where they couldn't continue traveling and recommended to Mark that he look into getting a nanny. So he did. Her name was Rebecca Simic. 23-year-old Rebecca was sweet, caring, and pretty, and everyone loved her. Donna's mother and sister, who didn't expect to like the person who would care for Bailey given their high standards for her care, couldn't help but to love her. Rebecca loved and cared for Bailey with her whole heart, and they could see that. She was open and embraced the whole family, helping them stay a part of Bailey's life. Rebecca felt welcomed and supported by everyone involved, with one exception. Deanne, Donna's best friend, was still present and still offered her help with Bailey at every turn. But at some point her support became pushy. She insisted on being a part of Bailey's life, nearly to the point of trying to replace Donna, according to Rebecca. Rebecca mentioned her concerns about Deanne to Mark, but he dismissed it as Deanne still being hurt from the loss of her best friend. Mark loved Rebecca too. A lot. So much in fact that after less than a year of her nannying and several late-night talks and wine, Mark announced to Donna's family that Rebecca was pregnant. Mark was thrilled. Rebecca was pleased as well, but also surprised. Mark had told her that he wasn't capable of having children, so she had not prepared for that. The couple began planning their lives together. Mark started attending church with Rebecca and told her they could raise their children as Christians and that he would switch his faith to Christianity. When their family rabbi, Michael Datz, found out, he was shocked. He asked Mark how he could give up his entire life of Judaism. Mark replied, "Judaism is just too difficult and unforgiving." The rabbi responded, "Mark, I don't know what you're talking about. What do you need forgiveness for? The couple's relationship flourished with Mark being the epitome of the perfect partner and ultimately husband. There's a view on our balcony and Prince Charming is cooking breakfast. It's very easy to understand why I'm going to marry this man. Mrs. Wenger found film for the first time. The couple married in Hawaii in October of 1996. Donna's family was crushed that their beloved Donna could so easily be replaced in Mark's life just 14 months after she was murdered. By all accounts, Mark had moved on with his life. He and Rebecca moved into a 4-acre home in the suburbs of Springfield, where over the next 3 years, they would have 3 children, 4, including Bailey. As their family grew, they began to pull away from Donna's family, which hurt them immensely. When Sarah Jane would get to see her granddaughter, she would often just begin to cry, reminded that her beloved daughter was not there to watch her baby grow. That would irritate Mark. He didn't want her crying around Bailey. At one point, Sarah Jane tried to give Bailey a necklace of Donna's, but Mark asked her to take it off because it made him feel bad. From that point on, relations with Donna's family only got worse. They did not get along. Then Sarah Jane received a letter from Mark stating that Bailey would no longer be calling her grandma. Heartbroken, she wrote a letter back pleading with him to reconsider, but he insisted that he was not going to allow Bailey to call her grandma. After realizing that Mark was no longer the person they knew, they came to the painful realization that they were being shut out of Bailey's life and had to accept it. But it didn't stop the grandparents from sending Bailey a card every year on her birthday. Bailey would ask Rebecca, who Sarah Jane and Ira were. Rebecca would explain that they were Donna's parents, and that they wanted to let her know that they loved and remembered her. Meanwhile, Mark appeared to have fully recovered from the murder, both emotionally and financially. Less than 24 hours after Donna was murdered, Mark submitted a claim against her life insurance policy and collected $150,000. He also applied for assistance from the Crime Victims Compensation Act and received the maximum that was allowed by the state at that time of $25,000. But that wasn't enough. In an attempt to make Bart pay for their negligence in hiring a homicidal driver, exactly 4 months after Donna's murder, Mark filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful death civil lawsuit against Bart Transportation and the Harrington estate. He claimed that Bart should have known that Harrington was dangerous and unfit for the job. That move would eventually prove to be one too many. Just 1 month after Winger filed the lawsuit against Bart, the detectives received a surprise visit from him. It struck them as odd since they normally never hear back from victims after a case is closed, particularly ones who are hailed as heroes. Mark claimed he wanted to see if he could get his gun back from evidence. They had no problems with returning the gun to Mark. But in the process, he started probing. He asked them how the case was going, if it was still open, if they were doing any further interviews, etc. Detective Cox found the inquiry suspicious. His suspicions were heightened even further when Mark visited the station a second time, bragging about getting remarried. Doug Williamson, the other lead detective on the case, had always had his suspicions about the murder, but was overruled by higher-ups who insisted the case be closed. Cox was now beginning to agree with his partner. They both wanted the case to be reopened, but the higher-ups still wouldn't allow it based solely on their gut feelings. They needed solid evidence, and they didn't have any, or so they thought. Mark's life had been completely transformed. He had a new wife, beautiful children, a sizable insurance payout, and even a promotion at his job in the Department of Nuclear Safety. He had distanced himself from his rabbi, his religion, and anyone who had anything to do with Donna. Things were going exactly the way he wanted them to go, until they were not. Facing a potential company-threatening settlement, Bart fought back. The company's attorneys launched their own investigation, which spanned years. Toward the end, they would be exchanging evidence with police and sharing the costs of forensic experts. Police were more than willing to do so because by that time, some 3+ years after the murders, someone was making their rounds and dropping bombshells along the way. It was Deanne Schultz, now named Deanne Anderson. Deanne had faced several devastating life challenges following Donna's murders, and it was all coming to a head. In October of 1998, just over 3 years after the murders, Rebecca took Mark to the ER when he wasn't feeling well. They ran into Deanne in the waiting room, and Deanne glared at Rebecca. After the encounter, Mark told Rebecca that they would probably hear from her again. Rebecca did not hear from her, but the police did. After seeing the couple at the ER, Deanne decided that she couldn't keep quiet any longer. Deanne had battled severe depression and other mental health issues brought on by her guilt about knowing the truth about Donna's murders. She had undergone every treatment known, to the point of utilizing electric shock therapy to treat it, being institutionalized and much more deadly encounters. So after the chance meeting in the ER, and upon her doctor's insistence, Deanne decided to come forward and confess to police all that she knew about Donna's murder. She visited police, and in exchange for immunity, she told them everything she knew. She shared that she had been having an affair with Mark, beginning just 1 month before Donna was murdered, and continuing for 6 months afterward. Deanne claimed they were in love, and Mark had even gotten them wedding rings with plans for them to marry. They talked about divorcing their spouses, but Mark's response was that it would just be easier if Donna was dead. Mark told Deanne that all she would have to do is find the body while he was out of town. She told Mark, "I don't want to have anything to do with that. I would cease to be a vital person." Mark repeatedly mentioned Donna dying. So Deanne finally told him, "I am going to divorce John. You do what you have to do." She also shared that she called Mark at some point after she saw him at the ER to see if he would tell her he killed Donna and Harrington. While on the call, she asked him how he could live with himself. He responded that he had found Jesus Christ and that he was forgiven. Mark also told her that if she told anyone about the murders, their gooses would be cooked. And when referring to Harrington, he said, "Dead men don't talk," and that he didn't want Deanne to know the truth because ignorance is bliss. She said Mark threatened her not to tell anyone about the things he'd said, and she spent the last few years struggling with her guilt. Cox and Williamson were suspicious. They had interviewed Deanne on the day of the murders, and she had not mentioned any of this. So they checked the hotel records where she claimed they stayed, and they checked out. They also checked phone records, and found that the pair had racked up 845 minutes of phone conversations. They began re-interviewing people, including a nanny that the Wingers tried out before Rebecca. She told police that Deanne's husband, John, had called the Wingers home once looking for Deanne. The nanny went outside and saw that Deanne's car was in the driveway, and told John. She came back inside and knocked on Mark and Donna's bedroom door, and Deanne came out a short while later. The nanny told Deanne that her husband was on the phone and wanted to talk to her. They also spoke to another friend of Donna's to probe further about the couple's marriage. The friend insisted that Donna spoke openly about her marriage, and everything seemed perfect to her. She did note that about 2 months before the murder, Donna felt that Deanne was beginning to become obsessive and suffocating. She said it felt like she was trying to move in on her and Mark's life. The friend also recalled how after Donna's death, Mark told her that he missed having a physical relationship and needed a woman's touch. The friend considered it a pass at her and became uncomfortable. Around the time Deanne was visiting police, Mark presented a demand of $1.5 million to Bart to settle their lawsuit out of court. The company was on the verge of making him an offer when they received a phone call from Deanne. Deanne called Bart attorney John Nolan. John asked who was calling, and she said she couldn't say, but that they should not settle with Winger. She told them she had just gone to the police, and the case was going to be reopened. Nolan was all ears, but she said she couldn't say anything further, and hung up. The law firm had to call her ID. So Nolan called her back and told her, "You just told us not to settle." "Why?" She asked him how he got her number. "Call her ID." He threatened to subpoena her. So she agreed to come in, and ended up giving them a 60-page sworn statement documenting the affair and everything else she knew of. Mark withdrew the civil suit, but the horse had already left the barn and was halfway to the courthouse. With Deanne's statements resulting in the motive that was always missing, the case was reopened. The first order of business was to revisit findings from the original investigation. But when detectives went to retrieve the evidence, it was missing. It had been turned over to Winger's attorneys years ago to be used in his civil case against Bart. Handing over evidence to Winger's attorneys was the first in a long line of missteps that law enforcement acknowledged. They headed to the attorney's office to retrieve the evidence. As they were wrapping up, the attorney asked them if they wanted the 3 Polaroids he also had. Detective Cox didn't recall any Polaroids, but said sure. They turned out to be the 3 Polaroid photos that the first officer on the scene snapped before the paramedics arrived and removed the bodies. He had submitted them, but no one ever got around to actually looking at them. Those 3 elusive photos turned out to be the most impactful pieces of evidence in the case. They showed that the position of Harrington's body was facing in the same direction as Donna's. But when Mark explained how he shot Roger, he said Roger was kneeling down next to Donna's head as he was beating her. He said he shot him and that Roger fell backwards so that his feet stayed near Donna's head. The Polaroids showed the exact opposite, and the blood spatter experts agreed. The pictures were irrefutable proof that what happened that night did not happen the way Mark said it did. As they explored the evidence, multiple questions surfaced. For starters, Roger's coffee mug and cigarettes on the kitchen table did make sense. Why would Roger bring coffee and cigarettes to a murder? Roger had two ideal murder weapons in his car, a knife and a tire iron already fashioned with a handle. If he had planned to murder Donna, why would he have banked on a murder weapon being inside the home instead of bringing in one of the highly effective weapons he had in his car? Also in Roger's car was that note, the one that had Mark's name and address, along with a time, for .30. It seemed clear that the time was a meeting time. And why did it have Mark's name? Was killing Mark the original plan? Donna's body was found face down. If Mark had cradled her in his arms as he claimed, then why would he place her face down when he was done? Police also found it odd that Mark first went to the master bedroom. When you hear a noise, why would you go to your bedroom? Why not go to where the noise actually is? And virtually nothing that Mark described about the murder lined up with the forensic findings. From the blood spatter on Mark's shirt and not on Roger's, to the gun-spent shell casings that were not discharged, where he claimed to have shot Roger, to the location, position, and direction he said he shot him. None were consistent with findings. And then there's the 911 call. When police arrived at the scene, Mark told them that he shot Harrington twice, a few seconds apart. But at the time he made the first 911 call, he clearly referenced a single bullet he had fired. That was shortly before he bizarrely had to hang up with 911 while his wife lay dying, because his baby was crying. You can clearly hear Roger moaning in the background of the call prior to Mark hanging up. You could not hear him moaning afterward. And by the time paramedics arrived, there were 2 bullets in Roger Harrington's head. It also didn't help that Mark's version of the events seemed to vary each time he told someone. At one point, even adding in that he also struck Roger in the chest with a hammer because he was, quote, moaning and groaning. Detectives were also finding that there were quite a few people who had their suspicions about Mark and his actions around the time of the murders. Donna's father, Cash Brown, said that his son-in-law didn't act like a grieving widower. When they were taking a walk after the funeral, he said that Mark never shed a tear, as he described what happened during the murder, even though he could see that his father-in-law was crying. And both Donna's friends and family wondered why the front door was unlocked that afternoon, knowing that Donna always kept her doors locked. And according to Donna's father, one of Donna's sisters and a friend even tested out Mark's account of the events that night. One of them ran on the treadmill in the basement, while the other one fell to the floor upstairs. The person on the treadmill could not hear anything over the sound of the treadmill. In December of 1999, as both Bart and police's investigations were well underway, Springfield's local daily newspaper ran an article based on the claims that Bart made in the civil lawsuit against them. Based on the findings of the blood spatter expert, Bart claimed that Winger was the orchestrator of the murder, not Harrington, and that Winger had killed both his wife and Harrington. The article did not alarm the police or Bart, who were already knee-deep into their investigations, but it most definitely alarmed Mark and Rebecca. Rebecca couldn't believe that law enforcement was wrongly targeting her husband. She stood by his side, believing they would ultimately look into everything and her husband would be cleared. Investigators were indeed busy working on the case, but not necessarily to clear her husband. With the evidence law enforcement was gathering, the events of that devastating day came into focus. A month before the murders, Deanne Schultz confided in Donna that she was having problems in her marriage and was considering getting back together with an ex-boyfriend and moving to Minnesota. Donna tried to help Deanne through her marital problems and talk her out of moving, but at some point thought that perhaps a man's perspective could help Deanne. So she asked Mark if he would talk with her. Mark agreed, and he arranged for the two of them to meet halfway between her home and his current business trip location. They did. The affair began that night at a hotel and continued from there. They would talk on the phone 2 to 3 times per day and romantically connect in hotels, in cars, and in their own homes whenever they could. Their respective spouses were completely in the dark about the affair, even as they all continued to go out together to dinners and gatherings. As far as Donna knew, she had the most loving, devoted, kindest husband a woman could ask for. She set off to visit her parents for a week while Mark was away on business. She returned to face the unpleasant shuttle ride home with Roger Harrington. Despite the ride being a troubling one for Donna, Roger was optimistic about his future. He was proud of his new job with Bart, and he loved the van that he drove. The terrifying shuttle ride fell right into Mark's lap. He leaped at the opportunity to turn Harrington. into a scapegoat. As soon as he heard of the incident, he insisted that Donna fully document every detail. Then, 2 days after the shuttle ride, he asked his coworker what would happen to their baby if Donna died before the adoption process was complete. 3 days after the shuttle ride, referring to Roger Harrington, he told Deanne, "I need to get that guy in my house." That same day, he called Ray Duffy, the owner of BART, to complain about the driver. He asked Duffy for Roger's last name and said he wanted to talk to the driver directly. Finding the request unusual, Duffy refused and said that he would talk to Roger. Roger was eager to work things out, so he gave Duffy permission to give his phone number to Winger. On the day of the murders, Mark called Deanne at work and asked her, "Will you love me no matter what?" She replied yes, and he made another call on the day of the murder. To Roger Harrington, Roger's roommate was there when he received the call, and it was very clear that Mark called Roger that morning to invite him to his house, not to warn him to stay away as Mark claimed. Roger was eager to work things out with Winger and get his job back. He told both his roommate and another witness about the meeting prior to heading out at about 3:30. According to the crime scene analysts and blood spatter experts, once Harrington arrived and was inside the home, Winger likely forced Harrington to his knees and shot him from the back of his head. Hearing the shots, Donna came rushing to the room and Mark beat her to death with a hammer. He then called 911, but midway through the call, Roger began moaning in the background, trying to live. Mark concocted a flimsy excuse for hanging up so that he could finish Roger off without 911 hearing the final gunshot. A delay in between the two shots was consistent with both forensics, as well as a neighbor's report that she heard the two shots about 5 minutes apart from each other. Police reclassified the killings as a staged domestic homicide. Roger Harrington was not a murderer, but a victim, who Winger lured to his home to kill him and frame him for his wife's murder. On August 23, 2001, Mark Winger was arrested at his job. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and held on a $10 million bail. Mark asked a childhood friend to help him post bail, but the friend refused. With Mark Winger's arrest, the man who originally helped hail him a hero was now committed to proving him a heartless murderer and vindicating Roger Harrington. Roger's innocence was no surprise to the Harringtons. They never for a minute thought that the allegations against him were true, even when the case was closed. His mother insisted that despite his mental illness, he was not a violent person. And according to his sister, Barbara Howell, he was the kindest soul you'd ever encounter, someone who would do anything for you, noting that if she needed a gallon of milk in the middle of the night, he'd be eager to run and get it for her. And how the last time she saw him, he had stopped by to pick up baby clothes for a friend who didn't have much money. His family insisted his mental illness impacted what he said, but not his actions. His sister recalled the domestic altercation Detective Cox referred to, noting that during Roger's rocky marriage, he came home one day to find his wife and her ex-husband throwing his belongings out of their home. Roger understandably became upset and got into an altercation with the ex-husband. His wife tried to get in the middle of it, which is when Detective Cox showed up to break apart, explaining his perspective about breaking up the domestic dispute. Trisha Ray, whose mother owned another trailer Roger rented, tried to convince police that Roger was harmless, even gentle and kind. She said, "It was frustrating that no one would believe us. I know what the police were thinking. Here's this man with a good name and a good job, living in a nice house. And look at us. They thought we were trailer trash and Roger was crazy." Despite his run-ins with the law, court and hospital records show that while Roger was depressed and delusional, he was determined to never pose a threat to anyone but himself. As Winger's trial began, police acknowledged that they made grave errors during the first investigation, including throwing out blood evidence, returning Winger's gun to him, and turning over crime scene photos, the hammer and other evidence to Winger's attorney. But their second investigation was solid. The prosecution set out to prove that Winger meticulously plotted and carried out luring Roger Harrington to his home, shooting him, beating his wife to death, then framing Harrington for the murder. Rebecca was confident right up until the end that the 12 jurors would see through to the truth and find her husband not guilty, so he could come home. They did not. After 3 weeks of testimony and 13 hours of deliberation, on May 29, 2002, 6.5 years after Donna Winger and Roger Harrington were murdered, a jury found Mark Winger guilty of the 2 counts of first-degree murder. One of the jurors would later remark that if you're going to go over to kill somebody, You don't bring a pack of cigarettes and something to drink and just hope that the murder weapon is going to be there. But jurors overall said that the state's best evidence was the first evidence police ever collected, the 3 Polaroids. Mark Winger was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On the 6th anniversary of Roger's death, his family placed a small classified ad in the newspaper in memory of Roger. It read, "Although your death has interested many, it is your life we truly miss." Roger's father, Ralph Harrington, died in 2010. He lived to see that his son was vindicated, even honored, and saw his son's killer placed behind bars. To honor their daughter's death, in 1988, Sarah Jane and Ira Drescher raised funds for a new hospital wing in Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood, Florida. They named it Donna's Playroom. The Dreschers also established Donna's Fund at the Women in Distress Shelter in Broward County, Florida, to help victims leave abusive relationships. It provides them with funds for security deposits, babysitting, furniture, and more to help them transition to new lives. Mark Winger was sent to serve out his sentence at a correctional center called TMS, then later moved to Menard, then finally to Western Illinois Correctional Center, where he is currently serving. He filed multiple appeals of his conviction, one of which made it to the Illinois Supreme Court. He lost. In stark contrast to his slight figure when he entered prison, the 215-pound, now tatted Winger mounted a multi-year legal fight over where he could exercise. He'd argue that being required to stay in his concrete-walled cell all day was causing him anxiety, depression, and panic attacks, and that it constituted cruel and unusual punishment. He complained that running in place and doing jumping jacks in his cell caused his knees to hit the wall or bunk. Sit-ups made his bed too sweaty, and the floor was too dirty for push-ups. He lost. Then in 2006, for years after his conviction, 48-year-old Winger was indicted for attempting to hire a fellow prisoner, Terry Hubble, to murder 2 people, Dan Anderson and the childhood friend who refused to post his bail, Jeffrey Gelman. The original plan was for the hitman to kidnap Gelman, who Winger resented for refusing to post his bail. They would demand a ransom by threatening to harm his family. That plan later changed to simply killing him. Dan was to be kidnapped and forced to write and record lengthy statements that Winger had scripted, stating that Winger is innocent, that she lied and made everything up. The hitman would then kill her. He documented the entire plan in a 19-page handwritten document. He gave the document to Hubble, who turned it over to authorities and began working as an informant in exchange for being transferred to a more comfortable prison. Winger's 19-page document covered every detail, including ensuring that only Dan S. fingerprints would be on the letters and envelopes, and that her saliva had to be on the stamps. He tried to claim that he was just fantasizing and that it was all a setup, but his recorded conversations included statements like, "Here's the thing. Look at all I did. In all my own handwriting. There's things that only I would be able to put in this whole thing. The only one who stands to gain is me. It all points to me. I get busted right along with you. There's no way that I would not be implicated." For his trial, he wrote a statement to the court that read in part, "I am exceedingly sorry for my foolishness in sharing my fantasies with Terry Hubble, and I regret that my incarceration has so affected my judgment that I would write down my fantasies as a diversion and then be idiotic enough to trust those writings in the hands of Terry Hubble." This time, the jury took less than 3 hours, including lunch. Mark Winger was found guilty and sentenced to an additional 35 years on top of his life without parole sentence. He appealed that conviction as well and lost again. Winger has filed at least one other case against the prison as recently as 2023, and based on his pattern, is bound to file more. After Mark's conviction, Mark and Donna's daughter, Bailey, continued being raised by Rebecca. Rebecca divorced Winger and had her and her children's names legally changed from Winger to her maiden name, Simic. She described it as a symbolic step to be seen for who she is and not who he was. The home she had bought with Winger was foreclosed, and Rebecca, who had been a stay-at-home mom for 7 years, filed for bankruptcy. She moved her and her children out of Springfield and moved in with her brother, while she established a new career, credit, and a new life. She now opens up about having been the wife of an incarcerated murderer, and she and her kids collaborate with Big Brothers, Big Sisters, to support children growing up with incarcerated parents like hers did, she stated. "No one seems to think about the family when someone is incarcerated. I call them living victims. It's a humiliating, embarrassing role to play, although you have done nothing wrong." Rebecca and the children looked back on their childhood videos with hindsight clarity, analyzing Mark's actions and seeing him for the evil person that he truly is. While Mark had worked to keep Bailey away from Donna's family, in 2019, Rebecca worked with Donna's family to bring them back together, fulfilling what they all knew Donna would want for her family to be part of Bailey's life. Bailey now calls Sarah, Jane, and Ira her grandma and grandpa. We hope this video did justice to Donna Winger and Roger Harrington. Donna's mother said that Mark is like a chameleon, and it's that exact fact, that chameleon factor, that makes this case so terribly frightening. Case 6. Feline Eves Grant was born on December 31st, 1965, in Show Low, Arizona. She later grew up in Mesa, Arizona, where she lived with her mother, Glenna Lee Johnson Eves, stepfather Doug Eves, 2 sisters, Jody and Shirlene, and a brother, Duggar. They were devout Mormons, and Feline was known for her kindness and generosity, and for her deeply rooted religious beliefs. Her sunny disposition made people feel welcome and loved, which earned her many friends and admirers. In 1986, when Feline was 22, she married Philip Curtis Stradling, who went by Kurt. The couple had 2 children, Jenna and Austin. Given her deep faith, Feline often sought guidance for major life decisions through fasting and hours of prayer. She let her faith and belief in personal revelation guide her decisions, including eventually divorcing Kurt, which she felt was divinely inspired. As she grew older, Feline's passion for health and wellness became another defining feature of her life. She took pride in maintaining a healthy lifestyle, embracing fitness and nutrition as part of her daily routine. It was her commitment to fitness that connected her with her future husband. In 1993, Feline met Doug Grant, a charismatic businessman who owned a thriving nutrition company. Like Feline, Doug was also a single parent and was also in the process of a divorce. He also had a son named Bowen. Doug was an ambitious innovator in the world of nutrition and fitness who worked with several high-profile clients, including professional athletes from the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Phoenix Suns. Also like Feline, Doug was a member of the Mormon faith, specifically the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The two bumped into each other at a gym, and having actually attended high school together, they quickly reconnected and bonded over their mutual interest of fitness, nutrition, single parenthood, and their faith. The couple began dating and married later that year, for months after Doug's divorce was final. They expanded their family with 2 more sons, Marley, born in 1994, and Braven, born in 1997. From the outside, they appeared to have an ideal life, one which was rooted in shared values, faith, and success. While Feline's faith brought her comfort, it also strongly influenced her decisions. She had an unwavering belief in divine messages, interpreting her visions as communications from God meant to guide her path. These beliefs had already impacted her first marriage, with her feeling that she was divinely inspired to divorce her first husband, Kurt. And similar impressions later led her to suspect Doug of cheating. When she confronted him, Doug admitted to having had multiple affairs despite strict teaching by the LDS against infidelity. Coupled with his admission, Feline experienced additional visions that convinced her that divorcing Doug was necessary. It was part of a divine plan that she could not ignore. She told Doug about her visions and asked for a divorce. Despite his affairs, Doug is reported to have been devastated when Feline filed for divorce as he valued their faith and family life. But honoring her wishes, he granted her the divorce, and the two parted ways in June of 2000. Doug's path led him straight into the arms of his newly hired 19-year-old receptionist, Hillary DeWitt, who was also a Mormon and was 16 years his junior. Despite the split, Doug's company remained a family affair. 5 of Feline's relatives held senior management roles, including her parents, 2 siblings, and her sister-in-law. Interestingly, Feline's brother, Duggar, was the hired Hillary shortly after Feline filed for divorce, and the 2 of them began dating soon afterward. Many were surprised by Doug and Hillary's relationship, pointing out their significant age difference and what some perceived as a physical mismatch. Hillary's cousin even mentioned that she told her, "He's like a little man. He's old. He's bald. Why? You're beautiful." She said Hillary replied, "He's sexy and powerful." But before that relationship had a chance to advance too far, Feline had a change of heart. In early 2001, she and Doug met in Dallas to attend mediation for a civil lawsuit where they were both plaintiffs. While they were there, they discussed the possibility of getting back together. Doug returned to Hillary and told her he needed to work out his feelings, while Feline headed to a temple to pray and ask God what she should do. She told Doug that getting back with him would take an angel from God coming down and telling her to do so. But despite the magnitude of that requirement, she called Doug early the next morning and told him that while she was in the temple praying, God did indeed tell her that she needed to remarry him. Hillary, who was there when he received the call, having just stayed the night with him, was crushed. And he came out of the bathroom and I was standing there and I said, "It's over, isn't it?" And he said, "It's over." Doug ended his relationship with Hillary to remarry Feline. They got married a few months later in Las Vegas, 1 year after their divorce. But life after the remarriage was far from smooth. Feline often turned to her journal, filling its pages with thoughts, prayers, and personal reflections of everything happening in her life. It was her means of processing her emotions and seeking divine guidance. But at some point, her writing took a darker turn. She had visions of her own death and began preparing for what she believed was God's plan. She wrote about being told by God that she was going to die and about feeling spiritually prepared to do so. Stale, Feline pressed forward, living her life and trusting in the path she believed God had set before her. 2 months into their remarriage, Doug and Feline set out for a second honeymoon to Mount Timpanogos, an area known for its alpine scenery and hiking trails. Once there, they set out for a hike. They were both enjoying the views when Feline experienced what she described as a spiritual vision, specifically Jesus in the clouds. According to Doug, Feline was eager to get a closer look and climbed over a rock wall to get a better perspective. She then lost her footing and fell. She fell approximately 60 feet, but miraculously she survived, only suffering cuts and deep bruises. No broken bones. A large pine tree is believed to have cushioned her fall, softening the impact and likely saving her life. Medical staff found it odd that she didn't have more serious injuries considering the height of the fall. Feline confirmed Doug's account of the events, describing how her knee buckled just before she fell. When she landed, she said she was conscious but dazed. She urged Doug to not take her to the emergency room, but he insisted. There, she was treated and released just over an hour later, sent home with medication for her pain. The couple stayed with a nearby friend for a couple days before flying back home to Arizona. What her loved ones did not know at the time was that in addition to the journal entries she had made preparing for her own death, she had also left notes of Mormon scripture throughout the house before she left on the trip and arranged personal items with notes on them to her loved ones about who should receive them after she's gone. But friends and family were completely unaware of the concerning notes. Their focus was on helping Feline physically heal. Doug even contacted his physician assistant friend Chad White to assess Feline's condition at their home. White observed that despite her minor injuries, Feline appeared in relatively good spirits. To manage her pain and sleep difficulties, he administered a pain relief injection and prescribed a muscle relaxant along with a prescription for a limited supply of Ambien tablets to help her sleep. White explicitly instructed Doug to not fill the Ambien prescription unless the muscle relaxant proved ineffective, emphasizing the importance of not combining the medications. White also told Doug to call him before filling the Ambien prescription if it ended up being needed. But sadly, as Feline had envisioned, her days were indeed numbered. Doug would find Feline the very next morning lifeless in their bathtub. On the heels of an already highly suspicious fall, investigators had questions. They started with the most concerning development, Feline's death. On the morning of September 27, 2001, Doug said he awoke and immediately found Feline submerged and unresponsive in their bathtub. He said that at some point in the middle of the night prior, Feline had awoken in pain, but either he or she was unsure of whether she had taken one of the Ambien to help her get back to sleep. He said that she later decided to take a bath because she had urinated in the bed. He said that he dozed off as she began drawing a bath. Doug said he began CPR on Feline and contacted his physician assistant friend Chad White. White then called 911 while en route to his home. White arrived and began CPR as well. But with nearly every compression, only water or vomit were expelled. Doug knelt nearby, wailing and sobbing. Paramedics transported Feline to a hospital in Meso, where she was placed on life support. Blood tests revealed that Feline had a high concentration of Ambien in her system, enough to render her unconscious. Despite medical efforts, doctors determined that her brain activity had ceased. Later that day, Doug authorized the removal of life support, and Feline was pronounced dead that afternoon. Doug provided police with Feline's journals as evidence that Feline had carried out her plan as described in her writings. Based on Doug's version of events, authorities classified Feline's death as an accidental drowning. But Feline's family wasn't so sure. While law enforcement found no evidence of foul play, her family felt that Doug's actions around the time of her death proved otherwise. And it began the moment he said he found his wife in the bathtub. Instead of calling 911, Doug chose to call his physician assistant friend. Once Chad White called 911 on his way to the Grants' home, he told the dispatcher, "I just got a distress call from a friend of mine who just called me. I don't know if he's already called you. He said his wife is unconscious, and she took all the medicine he had. His wife, I think she overdosed." I couldn't understand. He was frantic. He told me to get over there, because I'm a PA. Then I told him to call 911, and he said, I'm afraid to. I don't know why he said that. Then there was his stepdaughter Jenna's recollection of the morning, which conflicted with Doug's account. She reported to police that Doug had already been up and in the kitchen, probably getting some food for one of her little brothers before Faylene was found in the bathtub. While the statement from the 11-year-old, particularly the word probably, was far from definitive, it conflicted with Doug's statement that he was asleep in bed until just before he found Faylene in the tub. And the question of why she drowned at all was also at issue. Contrary to Chad White's instructions, Doug had filled and administered all of the prescriptions, including the Ambien, without consulting with White. This decision raised concerns considering the potential risks associated with combining the medications. White also stated, "When I was giving Faylene CPR, Doug kept saying, 'I'm so sorry.' I gave her a sleeping pill, and then she went and got in the bathtub, and I woke up." He was real frantic about it. And back to Faylene's detailed journal entries. In those entries, she wrote about her acceptance of dying early, believing it was God's will for her to fulfill a mission beyond this life. She included specific instructions for her family after her death, even expressing a desire for Doug to marry his former girlfriend, Hillary DeWitt, and for the two of them to raise her and Doug's children together. After remarrying Doug, Faylene actually began writing letters and making frequent calls to taking on the role of a spiritual mentor to the young woman whose heart had been broken when Faylene remarried Doug. "I have held a secret hope and desire for several weeks that I would be able to see you both married, that I could be there. For some reason, this desire for you to be married immediately and to see you sitting together as husband and wife at my funeral has been so strong. I pray that your home will be protected from the adversary and filled with Holy Ghost. I know it will be." In a letter addressed to her children, she mentioned inviting Hillary to sit at the table as your mother while I am away, making it clear that she wanted Hillary to become a mother figure to their children. Faylene also wrote about her belief that Doug and Hillary would have a baby girl together, the daughter Faylene always thought that she would have someday. Faylene's journals also revealed her concerns about Doug's cheating again, even after they remarried. And while Faylene's journal entries were troubling enough on their own, what seemed to be the source of them was even more disturbing. Based on her writings, her premonitions of dying were driven by Doug's interpretations of what he told her were divine messages, even convincing her to accept another woman taking her place as both wife and mother. In her journals, she wrote about Doug's recurring dreams, where he envisioned her departure to the celestial kingdom. In an entry dated September 5, 2001, she expressed her acceptance of this fate, stating, "I must have faith in Doug's vision. He dreams it every night now, that I will get to go to the celestial kingdom." The celestial kingdom is the highest degree of glory in Latter-day Saint theology. On the very day of Faylene's death, it's reported that a neighbor saw Doug and Hillary embracing at a local park, suggesting they were in a romantic relationship. During that encounter, at which point Faylene had not even been buried yet, Doug allegedly told Hillary that she would be his wife soon. Doug was said to have given her several $100s in cash, and showed her the letter from Faylene, encouraging them to marry. Phone records would later reveal that despite Doug remarrying Faylene, he had still been communicating with Hillary in the months preceding Faylene's death. And things would move fast once she was gone. Just 3 weeks after Faylene's death, Doug married Hillary. The timing of the marriage raised immediate red flags, and was the trigger for Faylene's family's initial concern. They knew that Doug began dating Hillary shortly after his divorce from Faylene. But they also knew that Doug did not limit himself to just one relationship, maintaining a paid subscription to the dating website LDS Singles for months after he started seeing Hillary. And of course, there was life insurance. Shortly before Faylene's death, the couple had attempted to increase her life insurance policy from $300,000 to $860,000. The increase was not approved and the policy remained at $300,000, which Doug collected as the sole beneficiary. Doug told police that increasing the amount was Fayleen's idea, and that he did not agree with it. Despite everything written in her journal, and having verbally told family that she would not be around for much longer as far back as a year prior, family insisted that Fayleen would never have ended her own life, knowing it could jeopardize her entry into the celestial kingdom. But others argue that taking one's own life does not automatically keep them out of the kingdom. Based on all the findings, they were convinced that it was Doug who was responsible for taking away their loved one. While Fayleen's death remained classified as an accidental drowning, Doug was not spared from other consequences. With Fayleen's death, Doug's secret infidelities became exposed. As a result, he was excommunicated from the church in 2001 since adultery and sexual misconduct are considered grave violations of its doctrine. 9 months after Fayleen's death, her family convinced law enforcement to reopen the case, pointing to the information they believed warranted further investigation. The case was reopened and the police chief, who happened to be friends with Fayleen's father, reassigned the case to lead investigator Cy Ray. But by that point, mistakes had already been made. Given the assumption that Fayleen's death was an accident, officers had taken just 5 photographs of the bathroom and bedroom, failing to capture images that could have provided crucial context. Additionally, they neglected to collect key items for forensic analysis, including the bathtub, the sheets from the bed, and Fayleen's clothing. And of the forensic samples that were gathered, they were either mishandled or destroyed, leading to doubts about their accuracy. Authorities also lost Fayleen's medications, which might have held clues about what happened. To say the case faced challenges would be an understatement. Law enforcement struggled for years to build a strong enough case against Doug, hampered by the missteps and lost evidence early on. But their luck would eventually change. The case gained momentum 4 years after Fayleen's death in July 2005. Doug's friend Jim McAleer had approached Fayleen's family with incriminating information about Doug. He claimed that Doug had confessed to killing Fayleen. Investigators wanted to have a chat with him. When Detective Ray contacted Jim McAleer, Jim said that he didn't know anything and didn't want to get involved. Another year would pass without any progress. Then, on January 27, 2005, Fayleen's sister, Shirlene Patterson, contacted Ray again. She said that Jim had approached her family, claiming again that he had crucial information about Fayleen's death and would share the information if they gave him a $10,000 loan. Detective Ray worked with Shirlene to find a way to get Jim to tell them what he knew. He suggested staging a meeting in a wired car with undercover officers nearby. 2 weeks later, Shirlene and her husband met Jim in their wired car in the parking lot of a Walmart. Jim got into the car, and Shirlene handed him a $10,000 check. He then described visiting Doug the day after Fayleen's death. According to Jim, Doug said that Fayleen wanted to go to heaven and that he had helped her get to sleep. He said that Doug admitted crushing Ambien, putting it into capsules that Fayleen regularly took, then giving them to her. He then said that he filled the tub with water, undressed Fayleen, and placed her in the tub while she was still conscious but groggy. When she started stirring, he said Doug claimed he held her under until she drowned. Once Jim left the car, police arrested him for extortion and withholding evidence. Detective Ray offered him immunity in exchange for full cooperation. Facing the threat of jail time, Jim agreed to help. Detective Ray didn't waste any time. That same evening, Jim would conveniently bump into Doug at a building where Doug was holding a seminar. The two hadn't seen each other in over a year. Jim had been coached by Detective Ray to tell Doug that authorities were asking him about Fayleen's death earlier that day. Jim said, "I kind of panicked and told them I hadn't seen you for a couple of days after she died. They claimed they had information about what you told me about that morning." He went on to say that he had not told anyone about what you told me about what really happened to Fayleen. "What do you mean about what really happened? What did I say?" "About putting her to sleep." "What I told you, I told everyone," Doug said. Referring to the police, Jim replied, "They implied that somebody told them something." Doug told him, "I don't really remember at all that conversation." Jim reminded him, "You said it was like you were dreaming." "You'll have to explain it to me, Jim." Jim described you went in the bathroom, and you put her to sleep. "I did put her to sleep." "What do you mean?" "Put in the bathtub, put her to sleep." Then a week later, you said that's not what you meant. Doug replied, "Number one, Jim, these people say things and try to scare people. Just tell the truth." Jim reminded Doug of being alone in the house with him. Doug replied, "The only thing that concerns me with what you said is that I said that I put her to sleep in the tub. There's a lot of confusion. but the bottom line is I don't believe she killed herself. And I know I didn't kill her. And if all this comes out, all it's going to do is make her look bad when she was one of the most phenomenal people on the planet. If they want to come after me, they can try, but I know what happened. It was a really bad situation, but I loved her with all my heart. No one knows whether Doug realized that authorities had wired Jim, but it's certainly possible with Jim asking for confirmation of his confession right out of the gate. But in the end, the wiretapping didn't yield anything even remotely close to a confession. But confession or not, authorities felt that Jim's allegations were enough. They arrested Doug and charged him with first-degree murder in connection with Faline's death. The evidence against Doug appeared damning, but the full story was yet to unfold. As Doug fought to defend himself, his supporters felt he faced unfair obstacles at every turn, starting with the very reopening of the case. According to Doug's defenders, the family convincing authorities to reopen the case was not as genuine as it seemed. They noted that Faline's family remained amicable with Doug after her death, with 5 of them continuing to work as senior managers in his company for 6 months after her death. But then those family members attempted a hostile takeover of the business, pressuring Doug to leave. It failed and was followed by animosity. And within a month, the family pressed authorities to reopen the case, making accusations against Doug. They contended that Faline's father's close relationship with the Gilbert police chief, including the 2 of them attending the same church, influenced the chief's decision to take the case away from the investigator, who found no evidence of foul play, and assign it to his relative, Ray, instead. His supporters also claimed that the pill bottles and forensic evidence that were conveniently lost would have proved that Faline's death was either accidental or of her own doing. And of course, they referenced Faline's journal entries, stating it was God's will for her to die. Entries that began well before she and Doug had reconciled and remarried. Hillary had even recalled how Faline told her during a phone call shortly before the fall that her death would be soon. And then there was Jim McCauley, appearing out of nowhere, instantly boosting suspicion of Doug's guilt. He seemed too good to be true to law enforcement, and perhaps he was. After the failed attempt to draw a confession from Doug, Jim would later eventually recant most of his statements about Doug's confession, admitting that he fabricated it and claiming that he was coerced by police. In a 2006 interview with the Phoenix New-Times, he elaborated on his recantation, stating, "Doug is an asshole, but I can't honestly say if he did or didn't kill Faline, who was a real sweet lady. I definitely got the feeling that the detective wanted Doug to be strung up on a post, and he didn't care how he got there. I wish I never had gotten involved in any of this." But despite McCauley having been the catalyst for Doug's arrest, his decision to recant did not result in any of the charges being dropped. Authorities would continue to build a case against him. The investigation languished for 3 years due to lack of evidence while Doug remained incarcerated. When the trial finally began, it unfolded as a dramatic legal battle, capturing intense media attention and public intrigue. The defense argued that Faline's death was either a tragic accident or attempted suicide, and that Doug had no reason to harm his wife. They referenced the high levels of Ambien in her system and Faline's letters and journal entries. What they did not present in court, however, were Faline's actual journal entries. Prosecutor Juan Martinez successfully blocked their inclusion, arguing that the writings were irrelevant or prejudicial. The defense was allowed to reference Faline's statements about being ready to die, but the jury could not see her words for themselves. It was another blow to the defense, as they intended to use the journal entries to document Faline's mindset. But the prosecution faced an uphill battle as well. Now facing trial without their star witness's recanted statement, they presented Doug Grant as a S***T fiend whose oversized libido triggered him to murder his wife so he could be with another woman. They argued that he fabricated dreams and visions to convince Faline that she had to die as part of God's plan, positioned Hillary as her replacement, and deliberately administered what would be a lethal combination of prescription drugs to hasten that happening. They also called into question Faline's fall in Utah, noting that it was highly suspicious due to her lack of severe injuries from such a significant height. As the prosecution presented their case, they faced heavy criticism by Doug's defense and his supporters for several controversial actions during the trial. In addition to the jury not being able to see Faline's journals, they were also not allowed to hear about Faline's family members working for Doug after her death, or about their hostile takeover attempt. The prosecutor also successfully prevented testimony, both about numerous accidental deaths caused by Ambien, and also about inconsistencies in Doug's stepdaughter's accounts of that morning. Doug's denial in the recorded conversation by Jim McAleer was also not disclosed to the jury or the media. Doug's supporters argued that the trial scene heavily tilted in the prosecution's favor. While the prosecution was allowed 14 weeks to present their case, the defense was granted only 2 weeks to make theirs. And, as the jury deliberated for weeks without reaching a decision, it became apparent that they were struggling to agree on a verdict. In response, Prosecutor Martinez was allowed to add a lesser charge of manslaughter. This gave the jury an easier option to convict Doug, which, although legal, Doug's supporters felt was unfair. Overall, they argued that the prosecution pushed for a conviction based on emotions rather than solid evidence, and that all their controversial actions made it impossible for the jury to make an informed decision. The jury would take 12 more days after the new lesser charge was introduced. As anticipated, they could not agree on first or second-degree murder. They found Doug Grant guilty of manslaughter, indicating that they believed he recklessly caused Failing's death. Doug was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The case was closed, but questions lingered about whether justice had been truly served. Detective Cy Ray's role in the investigation against Doug Grant remains one of the most contentious and criticized aspects of the case. Ray faced allegations of bias, including manipulating evidence and exerting pressure on witnesses to align their testimonies with the prosecution's narrative. He was also accused of withholding key evidence, including Failing's highly revealing goodbye letters and interview tapes, depriving the defense, prosecution, and even grand juries of crucial context. Lost evidence, like the prescription bottles, only deepens suspicions of misconduct or negligence. More recently, Ray has transitioned to a career in forensic technology and consulting, founding a cellular geolocation mapping company in 2014, which was acquired in 2021. Ray has worked on high-profile cases and been featured as an expert on programs like 48 Hours and Dateline. He also co-hosts a crime podcast along with his wife, where he draws on his experience in law enforcement and technology. In early 2020, the prosecutor in Doug Grant's trial, Juan Martinez, was fired from the Maricopa County Attorney's Office after 32 years as a prosecutor following an internal investigation into his conduct. And later that year, he was disbarred following multiple allegations of professional misconduct, including sexual harassment of female colleagues and unethical behavior in high-profile cases. Martinez's disbarment has raised questions about the cases he prosecuted, including Doug Grant's. Critics argue that Martinez's aggressive tactics and ethical violations may have compromised the integrity of Doug's trial. However, no formal appeals or overturned convictions have been directly tied to his disbarment or termination. Doug's supporters called his conviction a miscarriage of justice. In 2009, in a quest to clear Doug's name, they launched a site called Doug Grant Truth, documenting the biases, corruption, and misconduct they claimed occurred during the investigation and trial. But for every person who supports Doug, there are just as many who are convinced of his guilt. They argue that it made no sense for Faline to remarry Doug if she truly believed she was about to die, especially if she genuinely wanted him to end up with Hillary instead. Instead, they believe that Doug remarried Faline fully aware of her death wish with the intention of cashing in on her life insurance policy. To them, his tears were nothing more than an act. Also in 2009, Doug's stepdaughter Jenna Stradling, 19 years old by that time, filed a multi-million-dollar wrongful death lawsuit against Doug, contending that Doug was responsible for her mother Faline's death. It sought punitive damages and aimed to prevent Doug from profiting from media deals related to the case. Key evidence that favored Doug, which was excluded from the criminal trial, was allowed in the civil trial, resulting in the judge ruling in Doug's favor. The judge concluded that there was no proof of actions beyond negligence and no clear evidence of intentional wrongdoing. The judge stated, "The evidence presented in the case at bar has not convinced this judge that it is highly likely that the defendant intentionally killed Faline Grant. Given all of the circumstances, including but not limited to those discussed above, the court declines to award punitive damages." Notable was the fact that Doug won the civil case despite not having a formal legal team. He represented himself with only the help of his wife and children, while Faline's family had the advantage of a professional legal team to represent them. Jim McAleer was never formally charged with extorting money from Faline's family. He has generally remained out of the spotlight after giving the 2006 interview to the Phoenix New Times, where he criticized law enforcement's tactics. After serving his 5-year prison sentence, Doug returned to run his business. Doug and Hillary remained married throughout Doug's incarceration and after his release in 2015. Together, they continued raising Faline's 2 sons as a blended family. The couple also had a daughter, reflecting Faline's expressed wish for them to have a child together. They named her Nevaeh, which is heaven spelled backward. In 2022, Doug was inducted into the International Natural Bodybuilding Association's Hall of Fame, recognizing his dedication to promoting drug-free bodybuilding and his impact on the industry. He expanded his business to another city and conducts seminars and workshops on holistic health and nutrition. Despite moving forward, lingering questions about Doug's guilt or innocence continue to shadow him and his family, with opinions split about whether justice was served. Case 7. Mackenzie Sharila was born on August 2, 2004, to Natalie Sharila and John Stephen. She grew up in Strongsville, Ohio, where she and her sibling enjoyed a comfortable upbringing. During her teenage years, Mackenzie, like many young ladies her age, was an avid social media user, frequently posting videos with her friends on TikTok. Although Mackenzie appeared to be a sweet child in her younger years, those around her noted that a shift occurred once she became a teenager. Some described her as selfish, vindictive, and cruel. With the attractive youngster having typically gotten whatever it was that she wanted in life, her sense of entitlement was well known. It pushed many of her peers away from her. As Mackenzie grew older, her parents still knew her to be the well-behaved daughter they had always raised, unaware of her developing issues. She began using drugs and engaging in disrespectful behavior, including vandalizing a church while she was under the influence. And her actions only intensified once she began high school at Strongsville High. It was there that she would meet Dominic Russo. Throughout his childhood, Dominic was well known for his great sense of humor and ability to lift the spirits of those around him. His siblings said that he was the one who always made them smile, always wearing the biggest grin himself. With his strong passion to grow and make the most of each day, Dominic was already an accomplished businessman, athlete, song producer, and entrepreneur by the time he was just 20 years old. But with his desire to make a broader impact on his community and to give back to people beyond his hometown, he planned to join the military. Dominic and Mackenzie were attracted to each other and began dating in 2021. They originally kept their relationship quiet, but shortly after they started dating, they made their relationship public via social media. Mackenzie would frequently post photos of them looking happy and in love. They appeared to be soulmates, spending as much time together as possible. Their families met and grew close as well, and it appeared that nothing could come between them. They eagerly anticipated graduating high school, so they could start their lives together. But the bliss didn't last long. Dominic began to notice a side of Mackenzie that he was not fond of. She started to expect Dominic to agree with everything that she said, and he started to get frustrated with how controlling she was. Amidst it all, though, they continued to project the image of a perfect couple on social media. At some point, Dominic decided to break off the relationship and approach Mackenzie with the news. Mackenzie disagreed and was unwilling to give up on them. But Dominic, desperate to be freed, insisted. Mackenzie was upset, but also determined to rekindle their relationship. But her way of going about it was problematic. She began showing up at Dominic's house, threatening to harm him and damage his property if he didn't let her in. On one of the occasions, he recorded her outside of his home making the threats. Dominic tried his best to defuse the situations, trying to reason with Mackenzie and calm her down at every turn. As he continued to reject her, Mackenzie's frustration and desperation grew stronger. She alternated between begging him to take her back and threatening him if he didn't. "What do you mean?" But the more she shipped her true side, the more convinced Dominic became that ending their relationship was the right decision. Despite the breakup and bitter disputes, like they had done in the past, the couple would eventually reconcile. They got back together, and Mackenzie seemed like a changed person, softening her aggression and seemingly genuinely sweet. She made plans for her and Dominic to attend a party their friend of theirs was having. Dominic was looking forward to the evening. Mackenzie got planned every detail. She and Dominic attended the party where their friends were pleased to see the perfect couple happily back together again. The pair danced, drank, and enjoyed themselves. To Dominic, it felt like an ideal night, and Mackenzie felt that way as well, but for an entirely different reason. At the party, they connected with one of Dominic's best friends, Davian Flanagan. Mackenzie also knew Davian. He was 19, and despite a challenging childhood in foster care before being adopted in 2010, he was extremely kind-hearted and positive. He had recently graduated from Strongsville High School, where he was on the football team. He planned to attend barber school, then open a barber shop in their small town. Davian joined Mackenzie and Dominic partying. Then the three of them stayed at their friend's house until the early hours of the next day. At 5 a.m., Mackenzie woke up Dominic to head home. As she was waking Dominic, Davian also woke up and asked for a ride home. So, on that morning, one day before Mackenzie's 18th birthday, Mackenzie, 20-year-old Dominic, and 19-year-old Davian left the party around 5 a.m. in Mackenzie's 2018 Toyota Camry. Mackenzie was behind the wheel, with Dominic in the passenger seat and Davian in the back. Initially, Mackenzie, the only one wearing a seatbelt, drove slowly, maintaining perfect control. But as she turned onto Progress Drive from Pearl Road, she pressed the accelerator and didn't let go. The street was just 3/4 of a mile long, or 1.2 kilometers, but within that distance, she reached a speed of 100 miles per hour. The road was relatively straight, perfectly suited for gaining unbridled speed. She sped through the industrial complex, headed directly toward the end of the road, where just beyond it stood a brick building. At the very last moment, she veered directly toward it, then crashed into it head-on at 100 miles per hour. But it was a very early Sunday morning in an area exclusively occupied by industrial business buildings, so there was not a soul around. It was a full 45 minutes before a passerby spotted the wreckage and called police. Within minutes, Strongsville police arrived at the crash site. Officers arrived at the scene of the devastating crash. The car barely resembled a car at all anymore. As the first officer hurriedly approaches, he reports that the car is split in half. This car is split in two. This severity of the crash is obvious, and he calls for additional units, noting that there is at least one person inside the vehicle. Radio, there's an occupant inside. Send us a squad now. This is not a fresh accident either. She's been here for a while. The officer notices another occupant. Radio, we've got at least 2 occupants in here. No one's moving. Oh my God. The officer finds the third occupant. Oh my God. ×3 guys. Radio, 3 occupants. No one's conscious. No one's breathing. But then they quickly notice that the driver of the vehicle is breathing. They cannot extract Mackenzie. Her head is wedged in, and she's severely pinned in the vehicle. Her fuzzy Prada slippers still pressed against the accelerator. They won't be able to extract her until fire and rescue arrives. In the meantime, despite their experience, the officers are clearly impacted by the scale of the accident and the loss of life. Oh my God! Oh my God! Jesus Christ! That's the worst I've ever seen. Rest in peace, buddy. Mackenzie has survived. Dominic and Davian did not. There were car parts everywhere. The car had struck the building with such force that it looked like it had exploded. Fire and rescue arrive. Mackenzie is extracted and life-flighted to the hospital, where she will undergo multiple surgeries to save her life. She tested positive for THC, consistent with her having smoked marijuana. And she was also in possession of a bag of magic mushrooms and a digital scale. Initially, the police believed that Mackenzie had crashed because she was high. But as the investigation began to unfold, authorities began to suspect that what Mackenzie had done was far more deliberate. When Mackenzie woke up in the hospital and realized she had survived, she tearfully told her doctors that it was her fault for killing her boyfriend. While the doctors thought these were just the rantings of a remorseful driver, the police took her statement seriously. After undergoing multiple surgeries, Mackenzie was released from the hospital and returned home with her parents. As the Shirillas prepared to welcome their daughter home, the Russos and Flanagans were planning funerals for their sons. Meanwhile, the prosecutor's office was conducting a thorough investigation, and it was not looking good for Mackenzie. For starters, police interviewed several of Mackenzie and Dominic's friends, from which a consistent theme emerged. They learned that she had frequently threatened him during their on-again off-again relationship. Threats like keying his car and forcing her way into his home, like mentioned previously, but also threatening to kill him by crashing her car with him inside of it. The most recent such threat occurring just 2 weeks before the crash when she told him, "Dominic, I will crash this car right now." Around that same time period, Dominic had even called his mother asking her to come pick him up because he was riding with Mackenzie and she was driving recklessly. Also, authorities and the public felt like Mackenzie was not acting like a grieving girlfriend responsible for 2 people's deaths. The photograph that she posted on Dominic's obituary seemed, as one news publication called it, twisted. Many also found it inappropriate and tasteless for her to attend a Halloween party so soon after the deaths that she was responsible for, especially dressed as both marijuana and a corpse, and then post the fully decked out costume photos on her social media account. And those weren't her only posts. Within weeks of the crash, she had returned to posting TikToks. I'm not even cool. I'm just one of those girls that can do a lot of drugs and not die. In one of her posts, she shockingly claimed that she was the one you die for, and she drew the same sentiment for a concert she attended. Shortly after she was released from the hospital, she was seen attending a concert, still in a wheelchair from her injuries. There were also posts that Mackenzie and her mother made on social media, replying to and soliciting a modeling job. Community members felt it was so inappropriate after the deaths that they emailed the exchanges they had made with the Los Angeles modeling agency to the police department. And police also gathered and analyzed the physical evidence. A thorough analysis was done on the vehicle, and it was found to not have any defects or malfunctions that would have contributed to the crash. Additionally, the Toyota's event data recorder, also known as its black box, revealed that the moment Mackenzie turned onto Progress Road, she began pressing the accelerator pedal to the floor the entire stretch of the road, her foot still in that position when they found her. She never attempted to press the brake pedal. She barreled down the short road until it teed at the end, slightly veering into the grass as she aimed for the building. The black box along with surveillance video showed that the steering wheel jerked 142 degrees to the right, and then left just before the car left the road and crashed into the building. And speaking of that surveillance video, that is where investigators truly began to question the teenager's actions. The bad behavior before the crash and the questionable actions afterward were not necessarily definitive. But the surveillance footage together with the black box data began to leave little doubt. Multiple businesses in the area captured the teenager's ill-fated path that early morning. But two of those videos in particular gave authorities a clear picture of the car, both en route and right up through the point of impact. The first one showed Mackenzie when she was calmly and responsibly rounding the final corner, including traveling at a reasonable speed, reducing her speed to make the turn, and even signaling to turn. Her actions in that video, authorities determined, were not consistent with someone erratically driving under the influence. The second video shows how once she is on the final road, she accelerates at full speed before finally veering at the last moment into the brick building. Her controlled actions just prior to turning onto the street indicated that Mackenzie was in complete control of the vehicle. So authorities concluded that her actions once she turned the corner were entirely deliberate. Taking a look at her route via Google Maps puts into perspective exactly how devastating her 100-mile-per-hour plunge into the building actually was. As she traveled down Progress Avenue, headed straight toward the building that lied at the end, veering slightly onto the grass as she was about to traverse the rocks and sign, heading straight for the corner of the building. The devastation was not surprising, and such a meticulous, destructive path was no accident either. After analyzing Mackenzie's phone and GPS data, authorities found that she had spent a significant amount of time on that completely out-of-the-way Progress Road just a few days before the crash. They surmised that she had spent the time scouting the area as she plotted the crash, given no other explanation for her to be in that industrial area. But Mackenzie wasn't taking any responsibility. In fact, she felt like what she had done didn't at all warrant the potential punishment she may be facing. In the immediate aftermath of the accident, she asked police if they could just take my license away for 10 years or something like that. But her acts would have far greater consequences despite her perspective. Between her scouting of the area prior to the crash, the threats she had made during her and Dominic's tumultuous relationship, the speed and path she took on the deadly ride, along with her foot still being on the gas pedal, authorities were confident that Mackenzie intentionally and callously took the lives of Dominic and Davion. On November 4th, 2022, authorities arrested Mackenzie Shirilla. She is charged with over 12 counts, including 4 counts of murder, 4 counts of felonious assault, 2 counts of aggravated vehicular homicide, 1 count of drug possession, and 1 count of possessing criminal tools. Given that she was 17 at the time of the incident, she was taken to a juvenile detention facility. During pre-trial hearings, the prosecution offered Mackenzie a plea deal. She turned it down, and her attorney indicated they were prepared to take it to trial. For that trial, Mackenzie chose to waive her right to a jury trial, opting instead for a bench trial, taking her chances on what a judge may decide versus 12 jurors. Given the circumstances surrounding Mackenzie's crime, the prosecution planned to try her as an adult. For the trial, prosecutors outlined Mackenzie's aggressive behavior and threats toward Dominic to show how she reacted when she didn't get her way or when Dominic wouldn't do what she wanted. They outlined the time when she repeatedly warned Dominic to let her into his home or face the consequences. She threatened to break the handle off the door if he didn't let her in, and she began hitting the door and counting down the seconds before there was about to be said problem. Their evidence also showed that Mackenzie was fully aware that she could cause serious harm to her victims by way of her vehicle, given the repeated threats she made about crashing her car with Dominic in it. They argued that in the months following the crash, instead of being remorseful or mourning the deaths of Dominic and Davion, she was living a carefree and frivolous life, presenting the TikToks she made, her concert attendance, and her pursuit of modeling jobs. They presented the physical evidence and crash expert testimony that revealed how the crash was neither an accident nor the result of any malfunction of the vehicle. Instead, Mackenzie had deliberately and meticulously planned and carried out the death of Dominic, and his best friend, who simply requested a ride home, became meaningless collateral damage to her. In contrast, Mackenzie's defense team argued that the crash was a tragic accident that Mackenzie had no memory of. They argued that it was impossible to know who actually pulled the wheel to turn it at 142 degrees, just 1 second before impact causing the crash. He asked the crash analyst who testified whether Mackenzie could have been swerving to dodge an unexpected obstacle, whether a passenger could have grabbed the wheel to control the steering, or perhaps she was desperately trying to regain control of the vehicle. He did acknowledge that Mackenzie was, indeed, driving recklessly, but the evidence to the contrary, particularly the surveillance video evidence, was overwhelming. The judge noted, prosecutors noted that the video was also why they chose to try Sharila as an adult, stating, the judge found Mackenzie Sharila guilty on all 12 charges. At the sentencing hearing, the prosecution reminded the court about Mackenzie's lack of remorse, represented by her actions in the weeks and months after the crash. The judge also allowed statements from the families of those involved. Davion's mother was the first to address the court. Your Honor, my name is Jamie Flanagan. I am the mother of the victim Davion Flanagan. I want to share a small part of what we lost on July 31st, 2022. My son Davion is, and always will be, so much more than cargo. He was precious. He was an amazing soul with a heart of gold. He gave to the world what he wanted most in his own life, love. The kind of love that would rescue a friend in the middle of the night, no questions asked. The kind that would protect others and honor them. He made friends easily with his infectious smile. He was a gifted athlete. He had plans to go to barber school and open his own shop. My son did not have a clique of friends, but instead was a friend to all. He would go out of his way to show love and kindness to others, including those that were often cast aside by society, the less fortunate, the developmentally challenged, the hurting, and the unvalued. Davion made sure that everyone that crossed his path knew that he truly saw them, that he valued them, and that they were worth his time. Davion and my kids have had more than their fair share of heartbreak, of hardship, and of loss. Davion was adopted with his sisters from foster care. They are biological siblings. We are honored to be chosen, or to have been chosen, to be their parents, their forever family. I am devastated by the loss of Davion. The world lost a truly special man. The court also heard from Dominic's mother. I'm Christine Russo. I'm Dominic's mother. No one wanted this to be a murder, or to punish Mackenzie Sharila for this accident. But this was not a car accident. The evidence and science proved that Mackenzie Sharila murdered my son, Dominic, as well as Davion. There's no fix put in this case, as the Sharilas would like to proclaim. I want to thank Strongsville Police Department and the state of Ohio for seeking the truth behind this crash. Thanks to them, we all know what happened in that car that day. What we don't know is why. I wish I could change this every day. I lost 3 children in that crash. Not a minute goes by each day that I don't think about my son, as well as Davion. My heart is forever broken. The cries heard from the Sharila family and friends after the verdict are nothing more than a lack of remorse. Mackenzie Sharila had a choice. Dom and Davion did not. We are all left here to mourn. But what Dave, Dom, and Nick and Davion lost can never be remedied in any way or by any particular sentence. On July 31st, 2022, I called Mackenzie's mother, hysterical with the loss of my son and Davion. I knew Mackenzie was in the hospital, and the first statement said to me was, Oh, please don't listen to what everyone's saying on Facebook. Yeah, my son is dead. His friend is dead. And I'm checking on yours. Yet social media is what's important. Social media has made a game out of the life of Mackenzie, and is making a game out of this heart-wrenching tragedy. No one can imagine the pain of losing a child unless they have lost one themselves. The pain is forevermore. Time does not heal this wound. Mackenzie, going to prison because you did this. Be thankful that you're still alive and have a future, whatever that may be. Dom and Davion were robbed of their futures, their hopes, and their dreams. Mackenzie showed no mercy on Dominic, nor did she on Davion. Only God at this time can have mercy on her soul. Thank you. Mackenzie's mother also addressed the court. My name is Natalie Sharilla. I just want to say, am I allowed to address them at all? Sure. I just want to say to the families that I'm broken, sad, and lost, and my heart hurts for everyone, okay? Davion was her new friend, and Dom was the love of her life, and who was part of our family, okay? I'm just so sorry that this happened, and we're heartbroken, okay? And then, Your Honor, this was a terrible, tragic, nightmare accident to have happened that she has no memory of, and she will never emotionally or physically recover from it. She almost died, too, and we're asking that you please not run the sentence consecutive. He was family, and we all loved each other. That morning of the accident, she called. I got a phone call that there was a car accident, okay? So we went to the hospital, and I didn't even know who was in the car. The names had not been confirmed yet, and I was going to cry because I missed him so much. We loved him so much. So I called Dom like over and over again, praying that he was going to answer the phone, and he didn't answer the phone. So then I tried to call his mom, and she didn't answer the phone either, and I still didn't know who was in the car. I didn't even know if she was alive. I didn't know what was happening. So then we were in the waiting room, and then his mom ended up, she did call me, so I answered the phone, and I was like, oh my God, like, I don't even know who was in the car. Like, what's happening? What's that, Dom? And she said, what do you mean? My son is dead. And I was like, I'm so sorry. And then she said something like, and now I have to wait until your kid's out of the hospital. And then I didn't hear the rest. I was like, we loved him so much, and I hung up the phone. I did not talk about social media. I didn't even know what was going on yet, okay? So then that was it. In the hospital, that Vitality post, I commented on that because somebody had called her a murderer, okay? And she's not a murderer. So she didn't even have her phone at that point because the police had still had it, okay? So I jumped on, and I was like, she's not a murderer. She's more sad than hurt than most of these people commenting. She's been trying to get in touch with you. I mean, at that point it was just an accident. So I commented on her behalf, not because of the modeling opportunity. Who cares about that? I don't want them to refer to her as a murderer, okay? And I don't even know how that comment had got on the phone, because the police still had her device, and she could not access her phone or social media. That's why I did it. And I had called them asking if they could shut down social media, because people were calling her a murderer and making death threats and organizing groups to, take her out when she got out of the hospital and stuff. So I didn't even want her phone. I don't care about her phone. I don't care about social media. I just wanted them to stop calling her a murderer, so that when she did come to, and she did come out of surgery, multiple surgeries, that she wouldn't see all these people calling her a murderer, because she would never, ever, ever murder the love of her life, okay? The Halloween, for 3 months after the accident, she would only wear his clothes. She would only eat the snacks he ate. She would only listen to the music he wrote, okay? So she was crying for 3 months. So her friends asked if she wanted to go out trick-or-treating or Halloween, and it was at OU. And she didn't even want to go. She said, I don't know. Should I go? She couldn't even walk yet, barely. So I told her, I said, baby, please go. It's Halloween. You've been laying for 3 months crying, only listening to his music. Please go. Have just a moment of fun, a moment of fun. So we told her to go. My husband drove her. I brought her back home. She just needed a second of fun from losing her whole world, her whole world. So that was us. We told her to go. And that concert she went to with Dom's cousin, Abby, they picked her up. They brought her there. Mackenzie and Dom and Abby all decided to go to this concert together while they were in the hospital. She's like devastated and tragic. He was the air that she breathes, okay? And they went with his cousin. We spent all kinds of time with them after the accident. What was the other thing? I'm hearing an awful lot about your daughter. I'm not hearing very much about her today. Dominic, okay, I'm asking you for leniency because this was a tragic accident that she does not remember. And Davion, he's a new friend, and I'm so sorry. Does that mean his wife is worthless? No, 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 no. No. God, no, not at all. They all loved each other. They all spent every day together. I understand what it looks like. I'm saying that it was a tragic accident. She would never. I understand. But anyway, that's it. I just wanted to address those. We told her to go to those things, and then she did go with Dom's family. So look at that. Don't look at it with the look on that with different eyes if you can please. Those things are not relevant. Not at all, not at all, not at all. But she's a good. If you would have a moment, all you would need is 5 minutes of a conversation to have with her, to learn who she is. You would just need 5 minutes to learn who she is, and what she's capable of not doing and doing, and you would see for yourself. That's all. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm sorry. I love you. And lastly, Mackenzie chose to speak as well. Mackenzie, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. It's up to you. I would love to. Okay. We're gonna stay in the room. You can stay if it's more comfortable. Okay. To the families of Dom and Nadia, I'm so deeply sorry. I hope one day you can see I would never let this happen or do it on purpose. I wish I could remember what happened. I'm just so sorry. I'm heartbroken. I love Dom and Nadia. We were all friends and Dom was my soulmate. I wish I could take all your pain away, and I'm so sorry. And to my family, thank you for the support and all the love you guys give. Thank you for fighting with me. I love you all so much. All right, I'm done. Thank you, guys. Okay. With her guilty verdicts, Mackenzie was facing an automatic sentence of life imprisonment with no opportunity for parole for 15 years for each of her 2 murder convictions. The most challenging aspect of the sentencing for the judge was deciding whether the sentences should be served consecutively or concurrently. She noted that while the families desired the harshest sentence possible, she had to balance the need for justice with the circumstances of the case. She sentenced Mackenzie Sharila to 2 concurrent terms of 15 years to life for the murders of Dominic Russo and Davian Flanagan. Serving them concurrently would make her eligible for parole in 15 years. Some advocates for Sharila debate her guilt online, with her proponents making such arguments as Mackenzie having been coerced into a bench trial and that her post-crash TikToking and party-going, while perhaps in poor taste, were standard fare for teenagers and were not indicative of guilt. Some also believe that Sharila's acceleration could have either been her accidentally pressing the accelerator instead of the brake, or perhaps there was a malfunction where her pressing the brake did not register. Overall, her advocates feel that there was no evidence proving Mackenzie intentionally drove the car into a wall at 100 miles per hour, and that all the evidence against her was simply to attack her character. But most people are in the same Sharila as guilty camp as the prosecutor, who, after the trial, commented, "The intent was obvious upon seeing that video that there was only one goal, and the computer demonstrated that there was no attempt to slow down or stop, that it was full speed into a building, and tragically it cost 2 people their lives." While they were relieved that Mackenzie was found guilty, most of Dominic and Davian's family members expressed disappointment with the verdict, hoping instead for consecutive sentences. They felt that Mackenzie had taken the lives of 2 innocent young men and deserved to serve the rest of hers in prison. However, Dominic's father, Frank Russo, was more forgiving. He reflected that while his family was devastated, he hoped Sharila could eventually be freed. He stated, "It's horrible for everybody. Yeah, I lost my son. It's harder on our family. But I don't want the rest of her life ruined, too. It isn't going to make me feel any better." Mackenzie is currently serving her sentence in the Ohio Reformatory for Women. With her following of people who believe in her innocence, she receives letters from them in prison. She will be eligible for parole on October 21, 2037.